Tonight on PBS News Weekend, President-elect Trump makes a plea to the Supreme Court for the future of the wildly popular social media platform TikTok. Then looking back on the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami that claimed more than 200,000 lives 20 years ago this week.
From the perspective of survivors, when you go minute by minute their experience, it's almost like a horror film because you don't really understand what's happening and it's all incredibly unpredictable.
And as the year winds down, what music and which artists got our toes tapping in 2024?
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Ali Rogan. John Yang is away. President-elect Donald Trump has urged the Supreme Court to block a law that would force the popular social media app TikTok to be sold or shut down. It's set to take effect the day before his inauguration. The app has over 1 billion monthly active users. TikTok has said more than 150 million are in the U.S. But the Biden administration says TikTok poses grave national security threats because its China-based parent company ByteDance is subject to the will of the Chinese Communist Party. In a legal filing last night, Trump told the justices that a delay would allow his administration to negotiate a resolution to save the platform while addressing national security concerns. Bobby Allen is a technology correspondent for NPR. Bobby, thank you so much for being here. Let's remind folks, this TikTok law just passed earlier this year. Why did proponents of the law want to see it passed? And how did TikTok respond?
So TikTok's problem has always been China. Since the app surged in popularity in the pandemic, lawmakers in Washington have been really concerned because TikTok has ties to Beijing. Its parent company is based in ByteDance. And the fear has always been that the Chinese Communist Party can try to influence the app, right? By using the app to collect Americans' data or to try to shape Americans' views about the world. So this law was passed that is forcing TikTok to shed its Beijing parent company or be banned nationwide. ByteDance says TikTok isn't for sale. So the law is set to take effect January 19th.
And of course, we are now in this protracted legal battle. Get us up to speed on how that has been playing out and how this got to the Supreme Court so relatively quickly.
So soon after the law was signed by President Biden in April, TikTok appealed. And they made a First Amendment case saying the Americans who use the app will have their free speech suppressed if this app is put out of business. But the appeals court came back and said, you know what? The national security case against TikTok is really compelling. We're also very worried about China. This law is valid. So then TikTok appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court looked at the appeals court decision and said, you know what? This needs review. And the Supreme Court set an emergency hearing on a lightning fast deadline. So in a matter of weeks, the Department of Justice and lawyers for TikTok will be meeting in the Supreme Court to decide the fate of this app.
And now, of course, President-elect Trump is getting involved with this letter. What exactly is he asking for?
It was a really stunning letter that surprised lots of legal observers across the political spectrum. Basically, Trump wrote a letter to the court saying, hey, Supreme Court, maybe you should hold off on your ruling and give me some time as president-elect to come into the White House and broker a deal that could result in the selling of TikTok. It's a pretty extraordinary request, given that Trump, right now, he is president-elect, but right now he's filing this motion as a private citizen, right? He doesn't have any kind of legal authority to make this request, but he made it nonetheless. And, inside TikTok, they are thrilled because it was always a dice roll in terms of what would happen at the Supreme Court. But now we have the president-elect saying, TikTok, don't worry, I'm going to rescue the app one way or another.
So the president-elect has evolved on TikTok. He wanted to ban it during his first administration. Why now the reversal?
So Trump has said publicly that TikTok helped turn out the youth vote. But behind the scenes, something else has been happening. There's a hedge fund manager named Jeff Yoss in the Philadelphia area. He and his company, Susquehanna International Group, have a $30 billion stake in ByteDance, the owner of TikTok. And advisors close to Yoss have been pushing Trump to see TikTok a little differently. There was this big meeting between Trump and Yoss in Florida in March, and shortly after, Trump started changing his tune.
Very quickly, Bobby, do we have any indication of whether or not the Supreme Court's going to take this into account and respond to it?
It's really hard to get inside the minds of the justices and know what might happen. But regardless of what the Supreme Court decides, Trump is going to have a lot of power over TikTok because if the Supreme Court decides to reverse the law, well, then Trump can just say, fine, TikTok lives to see another day. If the court decides to uphold the law gives Trump tons of latitude to interpret it, and he might just interpret it in a way that never bans TikTok at all.
That's NPR's Bobby Allen. Thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Russian President Vladimir Putin issued a rare apology today following the deadly plane crash of an Azerbaijani airliner earlier this week. Putin spoke with the leaders of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan to send his condolences following the crash that killed at least 38 people, but he stopped short of taking responsibility. The flight was en route to the Chechen capital of Grozny when it crash-landed Wednesday. The Kremlin said Ukrainian drones were attacking the area and Russian air defense systems were firing near the airport, but did not say those systems hit the plane. White House officials said this week early indications point to the possibility that the Russian air defense system brought down the plane. The investigation is ongoing. The head of one of the last functioning hospitals in northern Gaza is now in the custody of the Israeli military. The Gaza Health Ministry says the director was forcibly arrested by the IDF one day after troops stormed the hospital. The IDF says Hamas used the hospital to conduct operations, but provided no evidence. In central Gaza, an Israeli airstrike hit a home overnight, killing 9 people. Witnesses say 4 children were among those killed. There are fears more victims could be stuck beneath the rubble. One lucky person in California will be going into the new year as a Mega Millions jackpot winner. A winning ticket was sold at a convenience store in Cottonwood, California. That's about 130 miles north of Sacramento. The ticket is worth an estimated $1.2 billion, or a cash payout of $549 million before taxes. And Olivia Hussey, the star of the 1963 film Romeo and Juliet, has died. Hussey was 15 when she was cast as Juliet opposite 16-year-old British actor Leonard Whiting. She won a Golden Globe for Best New Actress, and the film won 2 Oscars. Decades later, Hussey and Whiting sued Paramount Pictures, alleging they were forced to act in the nude as minors. The suit was dismissed. Hussey also starred in several horror films, including Black Christmas. Hussey was 73 years old. Up next on PBS News Weekend, remembering the victims and survivors of the Indian Ocean tsunami 20 years ago this week. And the chart toppers and breakthrough artists that had us tuning in this year in music.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Marks 20 years since one of the worst natural disasters in modern history. In 2004, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake off the island of Sumatra in western Indonesia triggered a tsunami in the Indian Ocean that killed around 230,000 people across 12 countries. The wall of water swept up nearly everything in its path. Cars, buildings, and people. 6-year-old Sadiq was one of them. The wave ripped him from his mother Sauda's arms. His body has never been recovered, and she's found it impossible to move on.
Saya kepingin kok masih saya hidup.
If Siddiq is still alive and I'm still alive, I want him to come home and for us to see each other before I die. But if he is gone, I wholeheartedly accept that that is God's will, but I still believe he is alive.
Outside her home in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, neighborhood life goes on around the wreckage of 2 Coast Guard ships that washed up 20 years ago, a daily reminder to residents of the disaster. Sauda's story is not unique. In communities across the Indian Ocean, the devastation was unlike anything the world had seen. As the weeks wore on and the search for survivors dwindled, the loss of life ticked upwards until the death toll ultimately stood near 230,000. At memorial sites for the victims around the region this week, survivors and loved ones marked the anniversary.
I felt that the waves took my daughter away. I was so mad at the sea. I cannot bring myself near it, and not even have my feet in the sand. I wouldn't come around here if necessary, never. The sea took my daughter from me.
And in Banda Aceh, the sea produced waves of up to 100 feet, yet there were no warning sirens, resulting in the deaths of nearly 130,000 people here. Now the city has a new quake detection and tsunami warning system, which its residents hope will remain ready but unused. Earlier this week, I spoke with Daniel Bogado, the director and executive producer of a new documentary called Tsunami: Race Against Time. Why is it important to look back on this tsunami 20 years on?
Well, I think it's precisely because of the amount of time that has passed. 20 years is a long period of time, so it means there's a whole generation of adults who have no living memory of the tsunami. A lot of people learned a lot of information about what tsunamis are, what are the warning signs from the event itself. We wanted to create a historical document and also a memorial for the lives that were lost, but it also serves a bit of an educational purpose.
You uncovered an enormous amount of video and tracked down many survivors, got some really harrowing recollections. One really struck us. This is a man describing how he got hold of his brother and they ran away as a wall of water approached them.
And everyone was rushing in the other direction away from the sea. And Theo and I just joined the rush. As we were running, we were holding hands. I do recall Theo saying, "What about Mum and Dad?" And I didn't have an answer, really.
What did survivors tell you that surprised you the most?
I think a lot of us have a lot of wrong notions about what a tsunami looks like. In the films, it looks like this giant wave, and it's actually much more like a wall of water. And it's misleading. It's so misleading that a lot of people would see the water go back and they would just stand curiously looking, not realizing the danger they were in. And so a lot of the contributors have absolutely harrowing stories that come from that not knowing exactly what was happening. Even once the first wave came, often there was a second wave or a third wave or even a fourth wave in which people were caught up because they didn't know that that's what happens. And so from the perspective of survivors, when you go minute by minute their experience, it's almost like a horror film because you don't really understand what's happening and it's all incredibly unpredictable.
Many of the people describe what it was like to be hit by the tsunami, including this woman who described the sheer force of it.
I was underwater and I had no air. I remember the feeling of the wave passing on my face and trying to tear up my nostrils and opening my eyelids like immense force.
How have people coped with the trauma of this 20 years on?
Well, it's different for everybody. I did a series on September 11th, and it was a similar situation that we're approaching people 20 years later. You track them down, and you're a bit afraid that when you call them, they'll be angry at you for, bringing up the worst day of their life. But actually, I don't think that ever happened. People were just incredibly gracious, incredibly kind, and not in every case, but in most cases, very, very willing to share their story. They felt that something powerful had happened to them. And there was a certain level of wisdom about the things they experienced, the things they saw with their own eyes.
How much better are we equipped to predict a natural disaster like this one now?
With tsunamis in particular, we're much better equipped than we were 20 years ago. Part of the problem was that there was no tsunami warning center in the Indian Ocean. And the series follows a group of scientists who realize that there's been a massive earthquake, that there's a very likely tsunami, but they don't have anybody they can contact to warn, to evacuate the beaches. So all of that now has changed. Now there's tsunami warning centers in every major ocean basin. We would be able to get word out much, much quicker than we were able 20 years ago. But I think the lesson of the tsunami really is not just about the tsunami. For disasters in general, or things that people might see are on the horizon, we always wait for it to happen before we will respond. That's the real lesson of the tsunami, that we should be thinking forward about the challenges that we have and do things before thousands of lives are lost, not afterwards.
You've talked to so many people who have been through unimaginable trauma, not just after the tsunami, but other worldwide tragedies as well, 9/11. What have these interviews, particularly as it relates to the tsunami, taught you about the human condition?
When people get very close to this line separating life from death, people are always thinking about very similar things. They're thinking about their loved ones. They're thinking about getting home to their family. Wherever you look after that, you see people coming together to want to help each other. And you saw that on tsunami in every country, And so I think it does say something about the human condition. We are social animals. We do want to help. We do want to do good. But it's actually one of these ironies that it's these incredible, unique situations, these huge tragedies where they really show these, brighter side of the human condition.
Daniel Bogado, whose new documentary is Tsunami: Race Against Time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
However you listen to music this year, streaming on an app or the old-fashioned way on the radio, 2024 was a year that saw breakthrough artists, chart-topping hits, and a return of some top-tier legacy performers. Stephanie Tsai takes a look at the music that had us hitting repeat this year.
2024 saw people flock to music festivals in growing numbers across the country to see their favorite performers. And female artists took over the airwaves as well as our playlist, boosted by chart-topping hits from the likes of Beyoncé, Sabrina Carpenter, Billie Eilish, Chappell Rowan, and Taylor Swift. While British pop artist Charli XCX had a breakout year thanks to her massive album Brat that took social media by storm. At the same time, the impact of AI tech this year took some by surprise, presenting a new threat to the income and livelihood of music creators. To unpack the year in music, we've got Maura Johnston, a freelance music writer and critic, and Candice McDuffie, a senior writer at The Root. Maura and Candice, it's great to see you. I hope you've had a good year. Before we drill down into the big music news this year, I just want to get both of you to give your quick takes on the best music we saw in 2024. Candice, why don't we start with you?
I think in 2024, 2 albums really stood out to me. One of them was Beyonce's Cowboy Carter. It was released, I believe, in March. And with it, she became the first Black woman to top Billboard's top country albums chart since the chart debuted in 1964. There were great collaborations. She really put a spotlight on Black women in country. And she really broke down some barriers while having really good conversation about what it means to be a Black country artist. Another album that stood out to me was Kendrick Lamar's GNX. From the west side to Senegal. It's a full moon, let the wolves out, I've been a dog. On it, he not only reaffirmed his position as a great, talented, and just really amazing MC, but he also wrote a love letter to the West Coast and that hip hop scene as well.
Maura, what about you? What was the best music that came out this year in your view?
Well, both of Candice's picks are great. I really loved the debut full length by the British band English Teacher, who are doing a sort of post-punk thing. It's a lot of really tense, striving, sort of like desperate music with grooves and jagged guitars. Their record was called This Could Be Texas. And I also really loved Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft. And this record was very compact, which kind of flies in the face of streaming era long albums. And it was also really beautiful, but it had some of the best vocal performances of her career.
In that sort of pop genre, you also had Chappell Rowan, and you had Sabrina Carpenter with a lot of hits as well. I mean, how would you describe that genre? Some of it feels very throwback to me, and yet these artists are topping the charts.
Yeah, I think that, there was definitely a lot of movement on the chart earlier this year with a lot of new artists and a lot of exciting songs breaking through. Chappell Roan, who, her record last year, The Rise and Fall of Midwest Princess, that was like top of my list last year. I think that she and Sabrina Carpenter, they, I think, represented a new era where like pop stars could have fun again, because there was a lot of just like po-facedness going on, I think, in pop for the past, certainly the 2010s were like very, very depressing, right? I feel like there is definitely a new spirit in pop music that a lot of these artists and songs that broke through this year are representing.
Candace, in your realm, and you cover a lot of Black musicians and Black music, where did you see sort of genres evolve and maybe, the synthesis of the old and the new?
I think Shaboozey also had a fantastic year. For him to make history by tying Lil Nas X for the longest running #1 single and the history of the Billboard Hot 100 was a really big deal. And that song, a bar song, Tipsy. There's a party downtown near Fifth Street. Everybody at the bar get tipsy. It was hip hop inspired. It was an interpolation of Jaquan's 2004 single, Tipsy, which was a big college anthem. Because I'm a little on the older side. Everybody in the club get tipsy. His album Where I've Been Isn't Where I'm Going. There's a lot of hip hop infusion on that project, and it was just so brilliantly done. So I feel like Black artists and country had a lot of visibility this year, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. I think their personas and their looks and, mixing all these beats, it was just so unpredictable and so exciting in that genre.
I want to talk a little bit about live performance. Apparently, Lollapalooza is still a thing. And of course, Taylor Swift ending her Eras tour. For both of you, what were standout live performances? Maura?
I saw Casey Musgraves, who had a really great record come out this year called Deeper Well that I liked quite a bit. And Billie Eilish, she had a sort of in the round set where she was just this kind of ball of energy constantly. It was this rush of energy in the room. It was really, really special.
That's cool. Candace, what about you? Any live performances that stood out to you this year?
I think Doechii had several live performances that were not only just groundbreaking in their presentation, but just went viral online. Her performance at Cam Flogna, which is a music festival in California held by Tyler, the Creator, she rapped the entire set, no backing track. She took her shoes off. Like, she was just so magnetic on stage. We also saw her perform on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
Easy, breezy, beautiful, erratic, scatter-minded, manic, borderline addict.
And then there was the NPR Tiny Desk concert performance.
Get up on the floor.
It really celebrated not just Blackness, but what it means to be a dark-skinned Black woman in this industry.
All right, my final question, and I know it would not be easy for me to answer, but favorite song of the year? Maura, you go first.
My favorite song was by this woman named Jade. She was a member of the British girl group Little Mix, and she put out her solo single earlier this year called Angel of My Dreams. And it's just kind of this fever dream of pop music and house music, and her voice is fantastic. But it's also kind of a very pointed critique of the star-making system that she came out of, because the Little Mix was a product of The X Factor, the British TV show that also produced One Direction. And it's one of those songs that when you listen to it closer, you're like, oh, she's really talking about, something kind of important and almost harrowing. But yeah, it's a great single.
Candace, what about you? Favorite song?
Megan Thee Stallion's Bigger in Texas.
With these losers, shut up, enjoy this music. Y'all gonna learn how to move with my time, and not for none of y'all amusement.
It's one of the best songs she's ever made. I think the video was a beautiful ode to Houston. She looks amazing in it. Her body crazy, makeup perfect, like dancing around, celebrating everything she's accomplished despite everything she's been through. And I thought it was just really a great way for her to end out the year.
Candace McDuffie and Maura Johnston, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our program for tonight. I'm Allie Brogan. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.